Good morning, Gen Rinpoche. Tashi Delay.
Oh, yeah.
We're so happy to be studying with you this morning, the precious Garland. And thank you, Katrina, for translating in such an excellent way. So we'll begin with some prayers.
To the teacher endowed, transcendent destroyer, one thus gone, foe destroyer, completely and fully awakened one, perfect in knowledge and good conduct, one gone to bliss, knower, the world's supreme guide of beings to be tamed. Teacher of gods and humans, to you, the Buddha endowed, transcendent destroyer, glorious conqueror, Shakyamuni, I prostrate, make offerings and go for refuge. When I was supreme among humans, you were born on this earth, you paved seven strides and said, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, then I bow. With your body's form supremely fine, wisdom motion like a golden mountain, fame that blazes in the three worlds, winner of the best supreme guide, to you I bow. With the supreme signs, face like the spotless moon, color like gold, to you I bow. You are immaculate, the three worlds are not incomparable, wise one, to you I bow. Great, compassionate, protector, all-knowing teacher, field of merit and good qualities, vast as an ocean, to the Tathagata I bow. Through purity, freeing from attachment, through virtue, freeing from the lower rungs. Unique, supreme, ultimate reality, to the Dharma that is peace I bow. Having freed themselves, showing the path to freedom too, well established in the trainings. In the holy field, endowed with good qualities, to the Sangha I bow. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions. Subdue your mind completely, this is the teaching of the Buddha. A star, a mirage, flame of a lamp, an illusion, a drop of dew, a bubble, a dream, a flash of lightning, a cloud, see conditioned things as such. Through this merit, make sentient beings attain the state of all seeing, subdue the four faults, and be delivered from the ocean of cyclic existence perturbed by the waves of aging, sickness, and death. This ground anointed with perfume, flowers strewn Mount Meru, foreland, sun and moon, imagined as a Buddha land and offered to you. May all beings enjoy this pure, venerable holy gurus. In the space of your true body, from billowing clouds of your wisdom and love, let fall the rain of the profound and extensive Dharma, in whatever form is suitable for subduing sentient beings. Idam Guru Mandalakam Niriyataya. I take refuge until I awaken in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings. I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddhas, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient beings.
Dik Songenla.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Tatia. Kese chimbu shiwale. Chunju nala sungudwa. Oh, tenjundi ni nyebar shindu kaas. Kibi tenjub tawa chubala. Keten dela pamba majubna. Shindi yandan chuba kalan yurus. Oh, she sungbatadwa. Arazu tawa keten churba chusawe. Tenju jimilin di tabu sungura. Chubala talwa. 메콤베네 녀와에다 돈돌아 소바 유타고 달라로라 소바 공부마 사와 텐데께나 ene chütübe ko milü toba yinaya ro chüt nyembe ne tu mero ari ro ko tu yo mara 정말 저 chütübala delwa komba chü tuna ha ko tumge o tinde dora chütübala delwa komba jorba rajonga da shenjonga la sobaro o tinde jorba chü tinjin jorgo ya rangwe ne jorgo ba de mini yeji wangbosa leta malo nela te sombana sangma sadi yore. Shenwene chagwe te sanje chonda tamche te tenpa neta te chinju shenchi tatu nye te shenju nga ta se te zuka gata chilo ne chagwe te nane chagwe tenji sangma tamche sadi yora. Chuchu wala komba tenji sangma tamche jorwa o tenju de nes. Nyeba shindu ka ase. Tende milu tobi ati shindu ne kombo res kares ne te gyudu wala ya. Gyudi pe shindu kombo res. Chidan niwaida tundu me solo maji milu toba tsamba ya ene tsuju mabu soni kyu mabu sagore tele ya sanje jitendo chamba da te chö nyeba la soba o de tabi tenjo ki chö chöbya dan dembe milu de tabu toba la tele ya kyu mabu shibu ju sa ko de sa te sa kawa sonda ne nyeba shindu kaas tenjo de ne nyeba shindu kaas tingara zo meri mesi niri niri mesi na samlo tangu yara o ngen belu te tagas men sam pe ke chimbu shibu chi yin sam tare mangsha ata ngen son le kete yore tare melu tup sangi tenpa tanche kukawa yabu shibu chi yin sam tenchun tene nyeba kawa yin sam niri niri shoga yala du neche samlo tangu yara tene mesi te tsa chimbu yin baha kura o re se kane chi she she tinte she na tinte she uri nyen tinte nyen uri sam yushana ko shira pensi omara nyeri nyeri metsinalya samlutan kuyate towa ya
So here, as the great master Shantideva has stated, this life of leisures and endowments is extremely difficult to find, but we can use this for the benefit of beings. However, if we fail to take advantage of this, then falling down, how will we be able to gain such a state again? So right now we have this human life with all of the kinds of freedoms and endowments. We haven't been born in the lower realms as a hell being, a hungry ghost, an animal, nor do we have damaged faculties in some way that we're unable to hear the Dharma or be able to understand it. We have all of the faculties to be able to comprehend this. So we have that kind of freedom from those states in which we can't engage in the Dharma. And not only that, we have all of these conducive conditions, the 5 sort of conducive conditions from our own side, such as being born a human and being born in a central place, being born with all of our faculties and having not committed certain types of karma. We have all of the conducive conditions that are external to us, like the Buddha having come into the world, the Buddha having taught, the teachings remaining, having those beings that engage in the teachings and sustain them. And so we need all of those kinds of causes these 18 sort of conditions to be able to really practice the Dharma. And when we think about this, the causes that lead to such a condition are extremely rare. I mean, to avoid a rebirth in the lower realms as a hungry ghost or as an animal or as a hell being, we need to have practiced perfect ethical conduct. And then outside of just having practiced ethics, we need to meet with the kinds of conditions like the Buddha having come into the world. And so the reason that such a life is extremely difficult to find is because the causes for gaining such a birth are extremely difficult to accumulate. And so this is something that we need to reflect upon on a daily basis, really when we wake up, to recognize the preciousness of this life that we have, recognizing that most beings are born in the lower realms without the sort of conditions that we have. And this is something, again, that we really need to think about, have a feeling about, just to be able to say it from our mouths, like, oh yeah, this is such a precious life, and we hear it a lot, but really to think about it, and based upon that thinking, actually take our life as being precious on a daily basis. This is what's important.
oya o tene tenjo de ne nyeba shina kibe tenru toba juba las 니가 잡도 마세. 아니 던셔 그래서 니가 던셔서라. 전다 전부 줘야 그래서라. 대리요. 기부 등로 더 받고 말아. 기부 말아줘 되네. 소소소 그랬더니 전다 센데 좀 찍고 전다 많이 봤어요. 네. 뭐도 개와 치마야. 뭐도 하다 메고 봐다. 뭐도 하다 메고 봐. 내래 타르바다 탐지킨 봐. 야야나 기부스 저 심마 땡저기 메리 넘버 타고토야 대대도네 땡 단단해 소진 고점네 타르바토야 저와 대섬 라치부 많이 봐 심지어 탐지 그때 좀 개교고세 연대 군대인지 산제지 고반토 베큐 단단해 봐 쏴요 봐 좋아 기부 전로 더 받고 발라서 기부 그때 먼저 당내리 먼저 라미 고바 내리 타르바다 탐지 kimba 니가 고반토 베 애니 땡케 봐 신시 더 되어라 기부 등로 더 받고 발라 저다들 좀나 좀 통게 소소 니리 메스나 삼루타 기나 타르베 사베샤기오레 탐제 김바그 사베샤기오레 규사대요랑 알았다네 단단 남산데 도구 말때 뒤교도 사대요라 기부총에 사담이 고마토였던 달이야 샹라 차와 방발라 소바 펜바트 발라 소바 네 기분 쟁이된 녀모 차다 공동하게 라소바 녀모 니리 메세나리와 바 초르 껴다기 되겠지라 아니 저 탐제 캠바 사제 고바토였던 달 개와 청중지 지나야 심지어 탐제를 펜베 큐르큐지스 김배 바로도 침바토바 큐지 서베 바로도 침바토바 준주지 바로도 침바토바 개와 청중지 사베나와 단다 개와 청중지 사버나 침바 ene tarchimba kewa tarchimba ngo tende se gyuro shosam tende sambutan ko echire to gibu tendo to ba kyobalas ya.
So here, this life of leisures and endowments that is so extremely difficult to find, as the next line says, can be used for the benefit of beings. This is really getting at how greatly meaningful this life is. If we use this kind of life properly, not only can we accomplish our own kind of individual purpose, and not just in this life, but gaining a good rebirth as a human or a god in the future. And beyond that, we can be creating the causes for that liberation and omniscience. If we use this basis, this kind of life, then we are able to not just create the kind of conditions to take care of ourselves in this life, but do something beyond that. So even if we are just beginning with the kind of activities that ensure a good rebirth in the future, from right now, we are able to create the causes for liberation, for the causes of the state of omniscience. If we use our life properly, as in we take advantage of this on a daily basis, then we can really, if we think about it, if we make an effort, we are creating the causes for those good sorts of goals on a regular basis. So by abandoning harming others, by doing activities to be able to benefit them, we are creating the causes for ensuring we have a good rebirth in the future. And if we see the faults of our affliction, see the faults of our attachment and anger and so forth, and make an effort to reduce those on a regular basis, then we are creating the causes for liberation. And if we go beyond just our own aims and use every time we engage in some kind of small act of virtue, if we dedicate that, saying, may this act of generosity go toward the perfection of generosity. May these go toward the causes of my being able to obtain omniscience for the benefit of other sentient beings. Well, this is really how we make our life greatly meaningful. It has the kind of capacity to be able to accomplish any of those goals if we accumulate the causes.
Yeah. Tanda ta nyeri mesinal samlutan ku erdoa. Karsora. Nye kawaii samtaran dis milu tu chachim shivishi tapta yusura. Ta di dagas tola ta yume sam. Tanda chimbu chubu yusam. Senti tsam mayin barwa. Kiwa chima penje tanda. Ya kiwa chima penje tanda sida. Ya chen dil pendo che menge dabtinde sigi omara. Senti susu mezi keda dilab gidwa. Sambi samlutanda lunga kone shenda dhawachi de cholam kanda che ko ba tanda so chubala so ba shala chawa pangya niri mechina te pendo tuye so chubala so ba pendo tuye tende ko samla tanga tanga niri nalya megi wachu pangya ke wachu tuye rongandu lami ko ba toge to dalya tenju da umaranji choko che chudu sungudwa tanga razo lada mi ko ba che tuye tensam to wala o tende ka namji megi chupang ke wachu tuye to sungudwa 티 니리 메시나 삼르다고도와 이때다는 괜히 제가 모두 함미고가 터네 신디는 것 잡네 영모파에 나 삼삼나지 고동하게 타도 캠페인이 저와 정반이 줄어서 가봐 조디네 소소 맞에 맞아 겨와 두에데 가봐 드러나 파미기타나 암주타트나 가가 겨와 교회요라 조글리아 야가리네 제수이랑 도월이네 간다 삼다 참바다 세we 코네 치조나 두디네 코삼을 코비 첸도야요라 어디 인데코 니리 지금 미마 레레나라 삼다 메지데 짜심 부쇼시 삼 다데 담멜 땅주메 삼 니마치를 투 와 전단 덴바체 근데 칼라서디나다 아로와 니니드이나다 제소스 메지디 초회 단달이야 최주베 리든 캐버리션데 초회 단달이야 세사야다로와 근데 니코야라서 와 트레딩지야도 강가데 메시디 최주에 땡데야 우치야 소야 단달이 삼지 삼바담베나 아니 니코야라서 바다 칼라사야라서 와 자주 상마탐제 그 개월이 교회요라 뒤에는 소소 메시지나라 니마치나라 자와텐데 빵바데 꽝바 제수 예라체 드린티디 제수 야부 정수 드린 메시지 야부 초토소 초단된 뭐 초토소 겨와든데 제토소 뺏게바 삼부인섬 소소소소래 겨와라 제수 예라체보다 제수 예라체네 겨와디 좀더 슉체르체르도라 다가서 남의 샤샤나 그 남지 차신 혼바도 요요 말아 어디에 대주 대처와다 와 니가와다 대처와다 이런 메시나라 samlutane kewala kumachaya the kesumbote the dwas ya
So we need to think on a regular basis about how hard it is to obtain such a life and how precious it is. And so not just using this life that we have now to sustain ourselves in this life, but really that we have the ability to do something for beyond this life. And often people might think, well, oh, that means neglecting the life at hand. But really, it isn't about that. It's like if we comport ourselves in the proper way, then all of our actions that we take to be able to live and sustain ourselves can become causes for good in the future. And so if the things that we do on a regular basis involve avoiding harm, not engaging in actions that are harmful to others, and doing virtue, particularly not just the 10 non-virtues, but as we have seen earlier here in the Precious Garland, these 16 dharmas for higher rebirth, if we do this regularly, if we observe those, well, we are creating the causes for happiness now and being able to continually gain such good rebirths, eventually being able to attain the state of liberation and omniscience. And so if we know how to look at the world, everything that we see, everything that we hear, that we encounter with our senses, we can use that as something virtuous. So here, this really means not letting our life go to waste by being sort of inattentive to this. But when we have the proper motivation, if we think like, well, whether we're eating or whether we're sleeping, if we think I'm taking care of this life in order to be able to use it as a vehicle for the Dharma, then all of our activities, even our eating and our sleeping, can become virtuous. If we think I'm preserving this life, I'm taking care of my health in order to be able to have this kind of support of leisures and endowments for use in the Dharma, well, then we are making all of our life sort of virtuous. And so if we are on a daily basis looking at the kinds of things that we have abandoned, those harmful negative actions that we have abandoned, and we have done various virtuous actions, to take the time to reflect upon that and rejoice in the virtue that we have done, that really enhances and increases the virtues that we have accumulated. And so here it is is that regular recognition of this life of leisures and endowments as being something very precious and difficult to find that encourages us toward that virtue.
Oh, yeah. Tension never shooting. Getting deal pemba maduna, chindi and that over colleges. That then they cook up some more. Never young gay, raw. Oh, today to be come delia. Getting deal pemba maduna, rala pembe church maduna. Kiwan dida, raw. Chindila dewa, kiwa chimal pemba. Pendi, pemba the dewa, Sanjay Temba, Sanjay Chu said. So, Karla girls and magic get on the Lagudua. Sendil day, you'll country doers and magic get out there. Oh, can it? Namine, go to Sungudua. Chambada Sawa to the community Tambo Sosu Namine. Pamanian dealers over the social down road ditching and Namjush. They think I'm doing it. There's all I mean in Comsungudua. Shall I talk about the Pemba to said. The near come any by Gachero, Cherotanche. Yang you get out and it's a long butter. And it's Zambulin that in the Simply Tamje said. The low Chan and the Pacha said Rogora. Peruchelia and Simja Keba make it Chagadua. Simja Karin, the Keba make it Chane. Simja turned to the Tandangarazo, Nazu, Konzo, Chiki, Ragin and Dating the other Kebachi make it. The one dollar Tunga made the Simja exchange to the Toma. Tunga that tended the other tend to long. I can get a chance on any Simja Tamjil me was said in Gora. Simja Tamjil me said to Simja Rede Kangang or Shetel Pendo Chit and they took to Yomara. When the Sanjay changes some Tami by Pep Saturday, Simja Tamjil returned to Guare. Ranking Werne Simjalia, Nirin that Kebachi make a Simja Imba Samji. The one dollar to me made a Simja Imba Samji. Shall I tell up at the Pemba together? Or today some given the Tamjil me was said Yongora. The Decotandane. Chamba that say he was a social nomination in drainage park, capture down where it was. Tangum said that today in the Yatan is on the draw man gained it made to the Kashel and Yawa Kashel and Roche Martinez to some town. Or to Indico. Today in the Bezinalia, some town and what any Yagasinamed, social Perpuchilia, social Yamachik till the Tisharis, to the Karachon, some Rotarwa, or Yawachos and the Chesurache. Young Tocho didn't dream us of something they could dream us of some. And there's some time anymore they I get to grow. Or then it's also similar you are done, I get to do a tired or you said. Namja tops the college, number physiology, and that's it. Toya sometime Romara, take about so the same day. Imagine Namjuna Sanjay Son Theatre. The Cochia Major covered, some day also in the Sanjitambe. Sem de edits order, sem de na lunga chuba dundura. Sema de na lunga chuba ngeba kaka yongora. Oti and ko nirin bezena chaya there. Semba chachunju membership, chachimbo to simja tamjelia. Pembe churches, simja tamje to get casa chili some maubal tagayo mara. Oti the best so simja shuk chimbo can anything reaching the gusaga or less of yora. Or tender some tango at the wati. Game Milutobati, paying Kawaye, Taran Chusul Tangime, Tondachimbutuku, the Maduna cheese of Mao Banayan, the Messi, Roakia, Kuka Kebash, the Dawata, Kombala, so what the day. Near Kawari, Karasan Miki or Mansha Kombara, the Chinjan did the Wanya Kawari, Taretobadi, Dundan Dembashan, Mao Banaya, near Sunday Kemegova. Remje and Joji Milu Ribara Jude, and a Tarwada Tamje Keba. Simja Tamje get to the Kasashi Chigi Samne. Teachedone, Jenda Juji Chude, Tabada Samba Comberim, Jugu, some Kuno set of the Samba shows, yeah.
So here, this life of leisures and endowments that is so difficult to find is something that can be used for the benefit of beings. But if we fail to use it to our benefit, then how could we possibly gain this again? So here, if we don't use this opportunity that we have right now for our benefit, use it for the Dharma, as in the Dharma is something that brings us happiness in the present and benefit in the future. This is what the Buddha Dharma is the source of benefit and happiness. And this is something that really begins with how we interact with those around us. We start with our family. We start with those that we are interacting with on a regular basis, and we need to approach them with love and compassion, engage in not harmful actions and doing things that are of benefit, right? And it is something where when we begin with our family, with those around us, we then slowly extend that out, such that it includes our neighborhood, our village, our city, our country, all the way to eventually all sentient beings without any distinction. And this should be made on the basis of really recognizing that all sentient beings are not distinct, in that we all want to have happiness and we all don't want to suffer. Right now, we make these distinctions of like, well, these are my friends, these are my enemies. But really, we shouldn't make such distinctions, but should be working for the benefit of all sentient beings. And here, that is a vast kind of proposition, as countless Buddhas and Bodhisattvas have come in the past. And it isn't as though they were able to eliminate the suffering of all of these sentient beings. But if we can learn to regard all in the same as as they are all the same in wanting happiness and not wanting to suffer, this is really the basis of equanimity. And here, when we talk about equanimity, it's not really coming to see all as like strangers, but coming to see all as equal in that way, not making distinctions and developing love and compassion, an attitude of non-harm and so forth in relation to all sentient beings. And this is something that is really dependent upon our daily practice, a daily practice of reflecting, like, what did I do that was negative, that was non-virtuous, and making a kind of vow not to do that in the future. I've made this sort of mistake, or reflecting, oh, I did this well. This is something that I want to rejoice in. And so in that way, this is how we improve our mind. This is how we develop. And really, the Buddha's teachings are all about taming the mind. As in the verse that we just recited, do not commit any non-virtuous actions. Perform only perfect virtuous actions. Tame your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. And so here, it's really mainly not about like some kind of external activities, miraculous feats that we gain the ability to do, but it's about training our mind, working with our mind. And this comes from a daily practice. And we make this kind of vow of, oh, I will become a being who has developed all qualities and removed all faults, who has the ability to be of benefit to all sentient beings. This is a kind of long-term goal, and we set that with the purpose of making sure that we gain without break good rebirths in order to be able to get to that point. It's very difficult to ensure that we just have a good rebirth in the future, given that most of the time we engage in negative actions. And so with this kind of resolve, we should think that I'm going to gain good rebirth after good rebirth, striving to be able to attain that state of Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings.
뭐야? 당아주 될래서 sammuto 왜 주제세. 산제 좀 되게 주 sammu데. 네 강가를 참선을 송기요 말을 가서 가실래야? 가실래 송기와라. 대마 송바데 가르스나데 또 왜 주제지. 수나야 코펜도 매바신네 주 체다롱을 소바텐데 루기자. 네 최송기요 말을 스티시요라. sammuto 왜 주제세도아. 최 sammu데 또 왜 주제지. 네 산제 급가 가르려 뒤셔남려. 최 sammuto 번일 소바테 송기요 말을 스티시요도아. 그 sammuto 왜 주제 가르스는데 솔로가 주주다 주주니디 시도아. 되네. 가시 르데 메자니스. 가시 르데 메자니 라시 무슨 주요와스. 르데 가시 르데 교 가시로와. 르데 메자니 고치담 말한저 르 로아케바 포메 수이나 케바다 포메 수이나 콜르데 메자메 라시 체치레 소거라. 르데 메자니 디메자 랑시체 임바데코 라시 소소 라바 무슨도 통데 요레스 라바데 코 토메토바 따다 규세할 때는 또 그렇게 말 무슨도 수수 바다시나 통토했는데레스 라시 무슨 지와 무슨 지주요레 통토요레스 이나야 대고 메자의 라시 임바다 tin데 samladi kortoyo maresana chakbala soba lu mezali chakbala soba tindewa chakba shukchimbu yongora ti mezali yembate de kongo sumdo tongyo ina tanda te ko shenja te toyo mare yabude samche ko samdu yora ti ha ko toyo mare songora lu le chakba de panto mado songora keba pemere chine keba le chakba de keba ne pemere lu le chakbala soba musum cheyewa 다도 나와 가인데세 메자와 임방으로 숨통고야래 다도 메자와 라시chen 임바다 메자와 가르소레다 류리 차시나 메자와 라시기 샤다 르바다 제담베다 텐데 라시chen 텔렌 중화테 메자와 라시 마부 중화라 소바 제주 공부 숨통대요래 소그래 다이나 고 메자와 임나마샤데 야고 야부 임바 상로 신샤키기도 하세 뒤에 상로 탄토고 메도 하세 티메나네 사무동반이라 소바 또까베 주제도 까바시전 사무탄토레세 지담베 송거라 가실르데 미사니 라시 무슨 주요와 다도 나와 가야돼 미사 임바 무슨 더 통대요라 미사 반사과 미상베 주임바 강강가주 통대요레세 얘네 semble never 티 얘나고 티 미사가 라시 제레 삼네고 semble 네토요 말와 자외라시레 삼제 착바시자 개월 소바테데 용도 와서래 무슨도 통대에도 저 진짜 삼로코 두고도 왔어 어디 옛날 소라 아니 무슨 통마던 거도 사무 동반이라 소바도 텔레자니 깔레카보다 야 어디 지소나
So here, now turning to the text, we are on this point of the reason that it is difficult to understand the profound. And so we see that sometimes the Buddha does not teach emptiness to certain disciples, seeing that it could potentially be damaging to them, that they could fall into a kind of nihilistic view. So this is because the view of the profound is extremely difficult to comprehend. Now, here, as it says in verse 116 and 117, beginning with 116, the impurity of the body is obvious, is an object of direct perception. Although one can see it constantly, it does not remain in one's mind. So generally, our body is unclean. It is something that is impure, whether we are male or female, whether we are talking about our own body or an attraction to another's body. This is something that we can see. It is obvious. It is sort of gross or coarse. We can see this directly because it is a manifest or obvious phenomena. However, out of our attachment to this body, our kind of clinging to it as clean or as pleasurable, whether it is our own body or that of another, we tend to sort of push away that perception of the impurity that is so obvious. So although, again, it is an object of direct perception, we can see, our body is composed of unclean things, our flesh and our blood and our bones, and then all of the various unclean things that come out of it. We can see this as being unclean. Although one can see it constantly, it does not remain in one's mind. We can reflect upon looking at our body, it is quite obvious that it is unclean, that it is impure. It is based upon impure causes. It produces impure things. But yet, even though it is right there in front of us, it is something that is obvious and direct to perceive, it doesn't remain in one's mind. And so too, when it comes to those things that are not manifest, that are not obvious, like say emptiness, this is even more difficult for us to understand.
Oh yeah. Tese tamju ne meba sederedo. Oh, tene tambechu tobe ta bukasure. Tarwa tobala sowala ke yechenge ke tadon zimba. Oh, tige ne zimba na shinge ta meba sora. Tese tamju ne meba. Anjingi tambechu tarwa tobala ke yechenge ke 跟进当今的这个金本男性的金本内金当个与买把的手了，然后都主办金标，然后都主办买把的，他让我送买把的这个手的，差完这些，这个让中国送的去买这些，大的就像你在你要不上不当年的到过去这些，啊，他让我送买吧，绿没上个让新本男性给我送的通通去买这些，什么这个其他不是。我去什么当班的呢？其他不呢？什么的烂就把就是，什么来了不接着到处的，这类讲用个嘛的是。我送到好过点给他这样个，那时我那的个到处买呢，碰见我送的出等个月呢，所怕线下个网个怕，到没都是这类到就这个多是。天天当班的来说吧，这类讲，搞个些头来上面的到搞的送不到。什么的烂就个嘛的是。哦，这个的多高的是呀，我的是呢。
So, here, as it continues in 117, if that is the case, how could this extremely subtle, profound, and unlocated holy dharma, which is not directly perceptible, easily enter into one's mind? It couldn't easily enter into one's mind. So, here, where it says that this is unlocated, this is really getting at that there is no sort of a focal point for that self, as in we perceive in our grasping at a self, this kind of self that is inherently existent or autonomously existent from its own side. However, it doesn't actually exist like that. And so that self that we grasp at, it is only, its non-existence can only be realized through reasoning, through actually applying with the establishment of logic in order to understand that. So even more so than the case of the uncleanliness of our body, that is something directly perceivable, but yet which does not remain within our mind, then how much more so for this extremely subtle, profound, and unlocated holy dharma, which is not directly perceptible? How could that easily enter into one's mind? It can't easily enter into one's mind. Again, when we have something like that is directly perceptible, such as the uncleanliness of our body, but yet due to our clinging at it, that kind of makes us not see what is directly perceptible. It's even more difficult for those things that are not objects of direct perception.
Oh yeah. Oh,天的他的个数了，上节中间的上节呢，都是这里啊，这里个全部说的个件修了，那我西边个的上节的呢，那我准备是吧西边的全部说的修了。哦，这个件说的呢，修了个去送个多，是不是就是身体嘛些是，这都比确实可以呢，收了等下过门那边，你们能等你都那边去是，啊。你这个这代表确实，这些的沟通呢，你처음 해봐라 소바트를 두고라. 나고 코알 코메고 비추 사부 시우지가 신소 신기 요소라.这代表确实可以是。除了电价关门的外，他除了电价多呢，要不是过头也没都送过啦。你妈是这里到现在现在家碰到有什么的，你妈拿到你去买现的，你带上的说广播听不的。냠수랑스네 메도 슈데네 가그리 삼네 텐데 손도 술에 땡게 과르면 메만 낭담 예도 네버 샤스 오 텐데 진 추마소니 슈라 테 슈에데 코또 까와예 바테 신예도 다로와 아니 창바다 자신도 저야 콜로텐데 퓨처 최고 최고 고로치야 콜로텐데 퓨처 아니 최소로 나스 산제 좀 되다 단다바도 배 투케 꿀레 좀 참마데 심장 되다다 심장 남래 펜버트에 치도 되나가레스 도베여데 상케브레스 다단데 메르 마소나네 베 메망보 방보치레스 담불레 심장리아 왕보 튜보요 등에요 라위요세 아니 왕보 라부 신도 왕보 넘보던데 요레스 계속 ene 고급 디마라나 네페 방보레스 네 최소로지스도 메도 베말 베르차제 메도 베마도 카샤 추 나로레 샤베 카샤 추 칸레 샤베레스 티나시 콘잠불링 멜리아 실험하자 넘버야 제 가가 유티티 최소로 나스펜도 연구를 했습니다. 대송에 급하게 최소라. 된다 최송이 제 최송을 제가 최모소 쇼에 또 까와야 봐. 요 먼저 담보람이 고반 좀 주야기 몇인데 깨고라. 몇인데 소소 떠다름 지시부지 개침부지. 네 시간을 차와줘야다. 내가 저 정말 연구라. 계속 방반에 송대. 네 시간을 동해 용지 교탐제 봐야 타르바. 네 탐제 김바 초래 름버를 막 모지 송거라. 왕보람 리타송을 땅봉고 주디 티데초 되니바 소바세. 근데 네 최신의 소방에 생고도 야, 되실라나.
So here, after becoming enlightened, again in the spirit of this Dharma being extremely profound, the Buddha actually remained without teaching for a period of time, for some months, 4 months, 6 months, until he gave teachings. And so there is a famous verse that comes from the sutras in which the Buddha expresses that I have found this nectar-like Dharma, this Amrita-like Dharma that is uncompounded, luminous, free of elaborations, peace, and profound. But as no one will be able to understand it, I'm going to remain in the forest without speaking it. And so here, the Buddha had realized that he has understood this extremely profound Dharma, which, when realized by others, allows them to not take rebirth within samsara, but recognizing the profundity of this and thinking that no one would be able to understand it, he said, well, if I don't teach, then that is better, and remained for some time without teaching. However, at the encouragement of Brahma and Indra, who offered him a wheel and made a request for him to teach, saying that, well, there are those of all different types of faculties. In this world, there are those who have extremely dull faculties and sort of mildly dull faculties, but there are also those of sharp faculties and extremely sharp faculties. And the qualities of realization that you have attained were for the sake of other sentient beings. So therefore, recognizing that there are different levels, you should teach to those who will be able to understand. And so here we see that based upon this request, like the example of like a lotus, where some lotuses are able to grow all the way to the surface and they bloom above the surface, whereas some bloom within the water. They don't make it all the way to the surface. So too, there are some who are not able to understand that profound Dharma, but there are others who can understand it. So although it is difficult, when again, the Buddha taught in ways that are tailored to those of different faculties. For some, he taught a dharma that made them not focus so much on this life. When we focus only on this life exclusively, we can't guarantee anything good for the future. And so too, when someone is fixated on, like, say, just liberation or just a good rebirth in the future, the Buddha teaches something more profound. But here, in terms of his not initially teaching, it was out of fear that this would be misunderstood.
야, 되들려네 솔로가 된 거다. 추운데 섭취를 깨워 예수다. 상계 좀 된데 최소한에 대해 사부시라 그래서 깨워 예 섭취를 깨워 예 쉐버가와 토추됐어. 디 쉐버가와 임바티 토수 추네서. 아니, 되나 투바 상계네 최대 발로. 투바 상계 좀 된데 상계네. 아니 샤십주 시구바도 와 올해다 진대 시바네 제네 그게 치시바도 시바라 아니 최송 말씀부터 쇼바레스 셰버가와 토슈데 되나 토바 상게네 최대발레 록바리 유르세 어처 말씀부 쇼에데 셰카와 임베주젠티레스 지다 땡아르네 고 랍제지 송송도 와티가네야 디가르송 거스나 상계 좀 된데 루루 까와체네 때시다 소아베 신기적으로 같은데 시에지 슈테버다 디체네네 텔이야 메세 깨단데 소탑데 오마키르 땡고레세 가야베 소안 내달류다 런주야 소야 전달 특이 배신부체네 소모도 같은데 저는 때야 버리면도세 류디야 오지고요라 드니야 아차베 촉시 매버체 타 매버체네 콘데발 타 매서 메타 등상가조 하고도 강은이만 나와도 간로 사강가 땡고 총고 강강고 주제서 뭐고 주제되거라 다 소소도 거두 개변지라 아마도 어쨌든데 이제 소화돼 우매 남는 땡고래 속도 될 빼지 않은 손에 담면데 지네 고 담면데 타고도 담잖아 내 고쳐야도 그랬어 류하자 소화돼 수답돼 따다지면 아니 류디 내 두 말에서 ane pe sachita pe tame ko tende chene ya ko tensa sachita ane ko ya chi di budwa lu kya chita me jakwa chana se tensa da kamucha chita de samluta da 제자 거 가서 그래 tame ba tanda samlu nal 세실에 tame ba 다 몇째 쳐야 되네 지담에 롱바다 tende ya gelade 타게 요 말아 소수전 몇째 samluta 되자 네 tame ba tende 지기 초시시에 매봐 깔래 잡고라 먼저 싸워라 얘는 가 중원데 초시야 다 그래서 깔래 잡아들 초시시 양 깔래 잡게 되라 다 뒤에 드마서 때 그거 되고 삼나 근데 소소 매치치기 손에 땡도 땡게 멤버들 삼을 담배는 거든데 개심을 다 롱바르제 거 땡도 땡게 손자 거야한테 차시 뒤에도 그 로가 찍으라 어디인데 땡하루도 어딘데 람쳐 쏘고도 어디인데 가서라 상계가 최대 지단에 시계반을 지은 거와 출루세에 지단 최대 조정에 들라 그것이 미gle 따다도 꾸주 조정에 지지월 갈래께에다 룰라 갈래께에다 tin데 봐서 밀때네 주 조제 지월에서 가셔야 그 책임보든데 군조든데 소화답이다 지켜야 슈구제데 소화말한테는 책임보든데 너네 나왜 다 냠보다 직접 전에 뒤쪽 전에 출시하시에 말해서 지금 샘도 저 제제 샘도 삼다야 서버드에서다 고로가 저 타도다 뒤쪽 전에 아니 저 랍세 손다시미 말해서 남배 쳐되고 저 샘기 개발을 삼을다 집에 샘도에다 근데 저 집에 쳐대서다 아주 쉽게 반응을 봐야 샤기하고 메탐시데스 다들 말하는 게 메타 출루셔서 어디 다이 아티출럼 돼서
So here, then turning to the next verse 118, hence, having attained awakening, the sage realized that since this Dharma was so profound, people would not understand it. So he refrained from teaching the Dharma. So the sage, the Buddha, having attained enlightenment, remained for some time without teaching the Dharma, really in a sense to demonstrate the great profundity of this. And so when we think about the kind of progression of the Buddha at one time did 6 years of extreme austerities for his body, toward his body, and really he reversed from that path. He came back to advocate for a kind of middle way between the extreme of deprivation, of really engaging in intense austerities, and the extreme of overindulgence, of never having satiation and satisfaction. And so I think we are able to see in our modern world really the detriment that comes from having that lack of satisfaction, that our desires have no limit. We take everything that we can from the earth, from anywhere, trying to sort of take over whatever it is in the service of our desires. And those desires have no limit. I mean, we can take and take and take to a certain extent just for some kind of short-term profit, but there will be no limit to the sort of needs that we have, the wants or the desires that we continue to foster. And so this is something where the Buddha advocated that we need a middle way. It's kind of like when we're tuning something like a guitar string or have a string on a stringed instrument. If the string is too tight, too taut, it's going to snap. But if it's too loose, it's not going to make any noise. And so we need to have the right kind of tension, the right kind of balance. When we have a sense of needing more and more and more, there's no limit. We can continue to make effort and try to extract and to get and to get. But yet there's not going to be a limit. If we don't sort of work on our mind and curb our desires, there's no satiation that we will find. Yes, we have to sustain ourselves in life, but we should do so in a way where we're satisfied with what we have. When we have enough, we have enough. This is, again, we can very clearly see this in our modern world, that there's a lack of sort of satiation, of continuing to just take more and more and more. And again, when it comes to the Dharma, as is emphasized in many places, this is mainly about our mind. That is what is primary. As Aryadeva has said in his 400 verses, some do Dharma in a way of like making the most sort of extravagant, pleasant offerings, or by making offerings of like pleasing words to the god. So doing these sort of practices that are related with other senses. But the Buddha Dharma is primarily accomplished through the mind. And so having this kind of middle way between extreme deprivation and overindulgence is really based upon our mind and what we do with that, not the kind of external objects that we're able to accumulate.
야, 저기 저라. 저대고 다 가서 그래. 남바에는 그 지대 제바보다 진짜 켈링기 오마라. 진짜 지대 제바보 상마 챙게데 개와 상게데 상마 제바보도 신다 제바이나. 네 텔라와다 소와 말람 타베다. 타치도 팔로 케야다 진짜 소체고 아리세도와. 티찬이 연구해서라. 남바 제베는 그 소소 셈데 되지. 셈데 온게트네 류가 제반 되지. 내 상에다 삼로 자치 좀 고관계 아니 교와 상에다 내 돌려 유럽마도 제바보 시행지 켈랭베드 소소 되게데 소소 교주 당에데 조전의 승부도 대선자 시작해서 토베 쇼루데 차와인세 갈래가 또가 시제 내주 또 고야다 소소 교주 당에지 조제고요라 제주도 갈래가라 시야소 마음다데 대삼기다 타치도 인타번에 소말았다 그랬대 대삼게 깔라가오 말아 소소문에 시다 체고에 매신다 발로 계시면 수지라 어디 인데 그 제바보 저저데 소소게 친구들이 뭐대 천지치 대전에니 소말음 따베데 나 조시야다 제주도 멤버들 셈조 지야데 셈도와 조시야데 오고도 대줄라면
So for Buddhists, there is no kind of creator God, no one who is giving us happiness and suffering. If that were the case, then we could just make offerings to them, sort of propitiate and make requests of such a God, and we would get whatever we need, right? But in the Buddhist system, our own mind is primary, and really this is up to us to develop our mind. So in many ways, the Buddhist path is more subtle, is more kind of profound and more difficult. If it were the case that there were some kind of creator God upon whom we could depend, we just have to make the right kind of request, well, then that would actually be quite easy. But really, in the Buddhist system, we need to work on our mind. That is more difficult. We take ourselves as kind of most important in the sense that we are responsible for our mind and our thoughts. We can't expect for someone else to just give that to us.
뭐야 근데 맞아 다가발래서 어디서 야 어디서 다 되서 다 천도 로버를 시켜주나 내게 남네 취장사 그거 어디가 이거
항상 간거 질러줘서.
아 그래서 다
디소게.
다 숨버들이라 사무라 로버를 숨에 님미세더라 저 사무라 로버를 숨에 님미다 아니까 저 숨레니 집에 담보니사 사무처 사무리아 로버를 숨에 님미디 셰도 와 어디가 셰도세나 천대 로버를 숨ጆ나 미케 남네 취장 사세 천대 로버를 숨조나세 다 동반이라 소바 취들이야 라오에 다 동바레 세라 라문에 집에 다요 마레스티 셰디산 숨고라 춘디 로버 시켜나세 다 전에 다들 매버해 두고 왔음 근데 삼로다 이나스다 동반이 셔도 채봐 자원에 가야 소매 담에서 안에서 가가 매버 건도는 되어 말아 춘디 로버 시켜나 메케남네 추장 사세 네 동반이 공부하셨네 동반이 공부를 해봐 많이 받더네 소소 풍도 되세 가서 내 준비를 써봐 교환하실라 써봐 매네 고창받아 써라 써봐 저를 통중제 특히 먹고게 소리서 들어라 추수도 돼서 얘들 매번 따와이 미사한테는 정말이 gör어서 얘들에서 동반이게 된다고 매번 따와 동반에 다요 말에 가요 말에서 진짜를 건드리시거라 얘들 매번 따와이 미사한테는 정말 gör어서 근데 체달을 놓이나 아니 미사함 얘도 매워에 아니 예송라 동안도 그래서거라 미사한테는 정말 gör어서 그 미사한테 셀로게도 교회 경계로 진대시려 예송도 미사와서 민다셔라면서 어디래 미사한테는 정말 gör어서 지지선다 대소하세
Yeah. So here, the next is the kind of fault of wrongly holding the profound. And so because this is something that is so difficult to understand, some, upon hearing that there is no autonomous kind of a self, no self that exists in and of its own right, some hold this in a kind of nihilistic way. They hold that there is nothing whatsoever, that there is no such self, that there's no sounds, no smells, no taste, no touch. So all of those kinds of things are just non-existent. So here, as it says in verse 119, if this dharma is misunderstood, it will ruin the unwise, for they will sink deeply into the filth of nihilistic views. So here, for someone who is unwise, who is unable to properly understand emptiness, upon hearing the teachings of emptiness, they fall into this kind of filth of nihilistic views. It brings them ruin in that they might negate karma, cause and effect. They think that there is no karma. If nothing whatsoever is existent, then karma also doesn't exist, and so forth. And so due to that, falling into this filth of nihilistic views, this will bring them ruin.
뭐야 어떤지 그 소리 깨쳐버리 또 왔대 그 당보할래 그 삼나 야보매도 단지 좀 된데 자갈 배라 최송서 당보 자갈 소라 그 손데 자갈이 여기 대문에 곧 따와만 보여라 출루만 보여사라 어디 이도장 그 대적에 소대 다 여버리도 다 여봐 랑에 다 여봐 다시 딱봐 치료대 때도 내가 좋아치 그래 나게 다들 건 좋아치 말해서 딱 말했어 딱 같이 kell도 아니 지부제 참여봐 남바인데 그 참여가 최초예요 말와 차세만 보진 뒤에는 텔레파치 미그를 따네 샤구르마도 제 차체 지금에게 그러지 당장 그수 라기 뭐 두통게지요 말아 참여 메시지 뒤에 참여 메시지 뒤에 지내까지 초르다나 차체에게 봐도 그 뒤에로 지마라 뒤에 진짜들 얘도 얘는 땡도 오지 이게 봐도 여고 그래서 봐라 지면은 뒤에야 수사는 처리처럼 하면 처리해서 그렇지 다른데 전다 참여 지시고 말이야 참여 메시지 지구세도 근데 딱 지구 다 되고 지구 참여만 못 하는 거라 사게 거 말이야 나중에 풍부하게 텐션 될는 시고라 근데 그거 말이야 참여 내 라와 그라 라와도 듣기 그래 너 어디 딱지 라와 좀 따스기도 근데 풍부를 대신 뱉다 속보다 소화다 두시다 남아시 받아줄래 때 가가지네 뭐 세븐나시 다들 배로가요래 풍부를 대신 뱉다 하시도 때 풍부가도 배 가가 다들 코너랑 유튜브 줄 나오셔요 말도 나중에 시 풍부가라 텐션을 따셔야다 너 때네파 풍부가 역시 진텔 때네파 따가네 또그 딱 받자면 따셔고 봐 대초구 자와치야 되게 다 자와치 마샤고 왔대 켈링 게 말아. 배 가가치 켈링 게 도와. 풍불에 되셔 베다스. 근데 다데 그 문제들 지도 남바인데 풍불에 지 손에네 다데 손구르마도 데 다레셔서 직간 손주고 손에 손에지 와 말아. 풍부 손알라 마데바 다 손도여 봐세. 근데 지와 말아. 근데 풍부 손알라 마데바 다 로서 그런 이제 카도로 지야지 켈링 게 도와. 근데 켈링하다. 아니 지금 제바보다 배드 바르마나 시그라 집에 식지 슝지와라 배드 샤지 배차지 그 지난 쉐바 강가데 템방고에 내주 코나 가리에나 뒤중을 뭐 뒤짬바보 개요 말아 지난 쉐제 정말 템방고에 내주 가이 뭐디 다 코나 그랑 룹체제 주 두샹게 슝지게 되어라 따들 교주다요 뭐 지난 등원에 미수지게 제 말에 기분 마셔베시 뭐 내주 코나 가리에나 뒤측날 술랍지 겹샹게 시와리 왜 내주 코라다 책기든 로아시고 제제 소샹게 줬다 디나셔제 사마테 버르시 어찌되지 텔링이오라 계속 강가 상계 좀 되게 제가 말에 되게 말에 송기 와라 되다 또 좀 믿어야지 송기 와라 근데 다 매바는 뭐 낭발이야 கொஞ்சம் 다 켈링 말해서 다 켈링 말해서 매매만 말해서 나스틱 체당하라 소리는 체다 가끔 매버려서 그랬어 다 매버는 마와서 다뭐 맹토에도 어디네 도배서 비치도 와 남배 다 켈링 말해서 கொஞ்சம் 대배 용자인 게다 뒤마도 다요 말어 현대 때진 대버는 좀 때네 딱뭐 다시도요 말아 뒤요 말했는데 다 매버 말해서 맹티네 톡도 와 야 알레티 소나
So here we have to sort of go to the context in which the Buddha taught. And at the time where the Buddha was teaching, there were many different systems that existed in India, the majority of which, other than Buddhists, accepted some kind of a self. Now, for some, they saw this as something sort of like an internal self, and all externally there might be some sort of changes or transformation. That internal soul or self was like unchanging. So for many who propounded such a self, they would say that it's something that is permanent, unitary, and autonomous. So permanent in the sense that although there are states that it sort of goes through, that self itself is unchanging, is permanent. And so too, they would accept that it is something partless. Actually, many of these various schools accept many partless phenomena, like say partless particles, wherein it can no longer be divided any further. Of course, there is a refutation of those sorts of partless particles that if they got to the point where they no longer had any sort of parts or directions, then how could they aggregate? How could we have one particle touch another and then become a larger kind of a thing? But for them, there are many things like partless particles or partless moments of consciousness, or even this self that they would assert is sort of singular or unitary, not having parts. Although, again, for Buddhists, there's no thing that could be declared to be partless. Everything can be divided up into various parts. And so too, most of these schools would assert that this self was autonomous, as in sort of set up by itself, not dependent upon anything else, that it has its kind of like own existence in and of its own right. And so some propounded that there was something that is like other than the aggregates. Like the self is not something that, as Buddhists would propound, is something merely designated upon this basis of designation of the aggregates that can't be located within them, but is something that is a mere designation. They would say, well, no, this is not a mere designation, but the self is something that exists apart from the aggregates, set up from its own side, side that is somehow not dependent or contingent upon anything else. They would point to or accept something that could be identified as being such a self. Now, again, this is not something that the Buddhists would propound, saying that actually when we try to find such a self, we can only say that it is merely designated on its basis of designation. There's nothing that we can point to and say that is it. And there are others who would propound that something like, for example, the Vedas, that are texts that they look to as being truth, they would say that there is no author. No one composed these Vedas, but actually the sounds are self-originated, and they are truth in and of themselves without depending or needing anything else. And so these types of assertions were refuted by the Buddhists. They came along, the Buddha said there is no such permanent, unitary, autonomous self. And so therefore they became known as proponents of no self. They would ask, if there is such a self, how would it exist? And so forth. They challenged the kinds of propositions brought by these other schools.
Oh, yeah. Oh, that go, Tamime, Jagalia, go to ya, Chulu Karine, go, Chiksha, Pasu of a chair, that in the Mambo, the Rana, Chepe, Ora, Chishen, Papa, Katia Saya Kashe, Chulu Chichi, Pasu, and Pe, Kasoda. Say the two, the chet in the sort of thing, the rest of the Medua, which is not thought of the English matter. Hindu two number, Kapache, number of solution, Kapache. Tende she chimbudoa. Te sama namde ma de tichi wa kasara. Pe choji ta ba so da. So te so ba che so te zura da. Kasara. Oh, riji chama da ne ge masara. Riji shi de chama yi skibi ma je be chigres. Tina yoba kanshi chama tembare se de. Riji shi de chama yi se. Tina she je chama tembare. Ota tina te zu kanga rik tome da kanga she yora. Manchu che da chik te zu kanga yisara. Rishi chema khela de mandi rese. Ti nor rese gdo namosen. Rishi chema tinde chema yo mares. Kibi maje be sikchi ya ne chu ne shi she yo mares. Tindal karsere. Yenden di kanga kibul yo res. Kyo kanga kibul yo res. Te sonda kibi chebe sikyin chinjeli kyo me yo mares yora. Dile yenden kanga de kansa yo res. Kansa member chili yenden yo mares. Yenden kanga kibul temba sonda. Kibuke chigre, kibu sheba kubisari, tindeyora. Richi tsematane geje masin, jiden chibaba sigora. Chule chendese, chu kangala soba chu chete zuge, chu eni tigbata andru eke cheyora. Rig maani rig tomede shibu sheyora. Otide nangba keling muda rig tomede mes, tambu kidunine kanga chikpa chigan rimato, kashe tombu kashe maati, shete madiris. O tinde na to kasura mera yungu wa ti chane ta me barma wa chebar ta wa se cheta re se no o tinde samju yungu ara o ti de tinga jo ha gu to dandang ye kar she gu re se nangba ge da me se do ta de to chi rong je ye ta ra we ta ti me sung gu ar ma do chi ta da me se yo mara Chita da mena ne tarwa toge da sanje je koban toge da te zu she ko de yo marwa cha ko tenjen de bar jo da yo re tene tak ba sam ji da yo ra phumbu nga la tenjen de ne pa lo fa ta she be ta chi phumbu nge cha wa chi de ta ge cha wa chi ba o tin de sha yo ra ti ta chi bu ma re chö tham je ta ma yin ge chö ka ga su ta te ro re cha chang ma ra we dang yi chen ji 속지가 말이야. 라오베 당이 생기 자다 제대로들 저 탐될 집어마도 다음에 현다 유에서 된데서요 말아. 실현님이 가서 풍부가부터 달아야 랑신기 동반나 보다오스. 네 소메 담에 팀에서보다 랑신기 두가 매송거 마도 지다 매송거 말아. 어디한테 남배 쉐드 망보치 남배 다 켈링 말에서 다 개말은 타르바 가르쳐 켈링 요라. 예송을 맞이했어요. 오늘도 선미 지면에 계속 가르친 시험이래. 어째서 다음에는 다 공부가 용 말아. 다음에는 롱제제네 롱제바보 다음에는 롱제제 지대 감다 수다티로 해서 버티서 매시 시나제네 시름이나 수메다 메티메 가메서 거라. 티 매시 요말 담보데 쇼탐제 랑신게 동바나 바야다 버치서 타오스 네 수메다 메데. 다음에 번나시 정말 자주 쓴 것도 되게 심부데. 나베다 와야 신게 마모여라. 그냥 또그 남들 신게도 하되 비제는 오늘 여부터 근데 레시지 고세 세부차고 이렇게 전부도 와. 자기 좀 되게 땅분에 다시 저와 되게 좀 전에 따온 유가 됐습니다. 공부는 할이야 다시 라와 여부터 나라도 지담이 다 되게 다시 저와 되게 좀 전에 따온 유가 됐어. 라와 다 여부 따와대 되게 sembrare 내가 챙겨야 거라. 두지 풍부 뒤동대에서 풍부가부 지나를 라와 다 여부터 동발에 요 말했습니다. 그래서 심지어 여 마에서 풍부가 나로 라와 당이 생기 심지어 요 말했어. 와, 그랬습니다. 아니 가까이 요 말에서 어까이 매우 말다스. 지들이 양라 초남라 때문에 신다 주거다스. 신대 양라 망보지 다 되게 투자를 못 받아 시대 신대들와 콜로로 제 저번에 다 대상에는 남두다 컴퓨터다 다 저저 강가 메시포디 간데도 담에다 요라 머신다 되나 자제 양라 차시 망보 쇼지요라 저저 강가 되네 저저를 내가 전에 강가 내가 전께질 남두 컴퓨터 메시포디 카르타네 따르마도 디나네 디기 레시고 찍을려고 좀 삭게요 말아 그 라와도 두어매스 랑wen에 두어매스 차시 망보라 땡지 되네 텔파밍지 딴 레가싱게 찍파밍 따요라 라와도 두어요 말레스 랑싱지 두어요 마 랑게 뭐에 두어네 매르스 나요라다스 땡지 데버리 중에 쓰기요 땡지 데버리 중에 쓰기요 알았은 것도 딩도 가서래 음 근데 따는 이제 본거에도 가래 그죠 두시 풍부대도 될 심지어 위험하니 지들 양라 초남라 때문에 신다 줘봐도 대신 풍부 남대네 군주 심지어 주도 세 때문에 딱 봐서 심지어 요래 땡진데 버는 줘 심지어 요래 라오에 다요 말에 라오에 당이 매번 하시 저 탐제 집발에서 지들 교육에 다게 도시네 시바 대신 꿀라 르자자스 라오에 다 매번 하시 라오에 수요 말에 라오에 다디로데 정말 봐 집발에 저 탐제 라오에 당이 요 말에서 저 탐제 다음에 봐서 됐습니다. 더 도체서 어디지 러서나 야 현대 남배도 봐 다한테 생계 마음도 하다도 양테 배치날 때도 요래서 거에 개침도 야
So here, previously in India, again, there were various different religious systems that engaged in a healthy kind of debate. They had the autonomy or the freedom to debate without that devolving into like killing each other and so forth, most of the time, we hope. But here, there are various ways in which Buddhists have refuted the kind of views of various non-Buddhist schools. For example, Dharmakirti in his Pramanavartika has refuted the idea that something like the Vedas, these texts, could be a source of sort of authority. To hold these as valid is really not correct. Basically, the kinds of propositions that are presented within these texts, again, they're said to have all of these kinds of qualities, but for Buddhas or for Buddhists, qualities are dependent upon various beings, various persons, and for example, Buddhists see the same kind of potential in all beings, whereas like the Vedas are very much concerned with with caste, with some being higher and some being lower, and so forth. And so the kinds of things that are propounded within these texts, and even taking them on their face as just being authentic or valid, is something that Dharmakirti strongly refutes in his Pramanavartika. And so here, when these different types of views come together, Buddhists do propound selflessness in that they refute there being some kind of autonomous, independent self that is set up by itself, that is kind of existent in and of its own right. But that doesn't mean that they negate a self altogether, as in there is no self, there is no being, there is no person, because there is a dependently designated self. Why would we be talking about sort of karma, cause and effect, or the possibility of liberation if there was no being whatsoever? And so in all phenomena, including those that are beyond the person, don't have that kind of autonomous nature. As we see in the Heart Sutra, we see like there is no eye, no ear, no nose, no mind, no body, all of those kinds of things. We have to recognize that that is preceded by this comment of there is not an inherently existent form and feelings and so forth. And so here, when it is the case that the Buddhists are labeled as proponents of no self, this is really because they don't accept a self as propounded by others. If there were the case, if it were the case that there were either a permanent self or some kind of autonomous, independent self, there would be all kinds of logical fallacies that would follow. And so here, none of this presentation of the Buddhist path would work if there's not a self at all. But here it is rather a dependently originated, dependently existent, or dependently designated self that does exist. And so here it's the Buddha has taught that all, just as one sees the self or the person, so too should one see all phenomena as empty of inherent existence. And so here there is another verse or line in which it says this kind of a view of the autonomous self is something is the mind of Mara. This is the source of all of our problems. And rather than there being such an autonomous or independent kind of a self, in the same way that a chariot is something that is designated upon the collection of its parts, so we should know all phenomena to be like that. So here, although in seeing these compounded aggregates, we can't say, well, that is the self. There's nothing within those that we can point to that exists as the self. But just in the same way that like a chariot is designated upon its parts, its wheels and so forth, or we could update this to a more modern example of something like a plane, a computer, and so forth, there is a functioning thing. We can talk about there being a chariot that gets us from one way to one place to another. We can talk about a computer that functions and so forth. But when we look within all of the various parts, there's nothing that we can point to say this is that thing. There's no autonomously, inherently existent phenomena within that to be found. But these compounded aggregates, while they are not the self, they are something that is the basis of designation of a dependently originated self. And so too, as we understand the person to be, we should apply that to all phenomena, come to have that kind of understanding. So this is somewhat of a context for the kinds of assertions that the Buddha was making.
Oh yeah. Tradition. Oh, tatunda odi chunde logbar she jo na meke namne chu jasa. Tidar meber tawaye mizande ni chawar yo se cheda wa mare se. Oh, tongba ni ki tunda de meber songba ene be pungdu gure se. Keba mai baso. Roa. Tidar meber tawaye mizande ni meta cheda lomba ene le jumde da kidi la soba tezu meber tagira. Oh, di meber ta ene mizande nye song la londu gure song gudwa. Oh, tene te ma se de wa de ya pungju ka res ne. Pungdu gure de. Shaya tene lo song ne so tongba ni ki tunda de mebe tondo la war song ne. Limbu kebe nga je chen. Oh, tene ka se pong ya marun tangi chen se. 남의 반에 지고 손들었어. 같은데 동반이기 때문에 매배 돈도 송이나 내 준비를 꼬아 땀네. 라 내 림보 텐데 단다 동반이 신기부 그지 다 강에 캐는 게 말에 요 말에서 어떤데 때문에 체단으로 잠바다 자와다 동해 용해다 심지어는 인지다 대도 탑지 차대 네 네가 총으로 요라 잠바 자와라 소바 아니 저 심지어 맨날 잠바 자와라 소바 시라시라 고야 수도 좀 매우 차두고 요라 어디 소자 매바데 따와이네 되네 님이 첨부를 껴 첨부를 쓰도 그래서 그 받았어 림보 캐뱅을 제체 아니 그래서 Pangbe maru tani che nami bane nyawa do otene le kidila soba tendel majibiche ne nyawa yeda to le kechi le sane ngeson la long do de station da namba ge tongba nye sudu kaya mebe tenda suna ne kyan chembo yongure ese karese ne tabji chata le chunde ta le sange le ken jebu sange yoeda tezu kangalo ko ta do wara tezu chemi tambe ne ngeson ke ada 어떤데 내 멤버서 그래서 거도 제가 제봤다고 많이 했어야 돼. 되게 좀 무시해도 어야 되지라나.
So here again, as it says then in verse 119, that if this dharma is misunderstood, it will ruin the unwise, for they will sink deeply into the filth of nihilistic views. If you hold this kind of presentation of emptiness to mean just non-existence, this is going to bring ruin through the kind of falling into these nihilistic views, bringing about the idea that, say, there is no karma, cause and effect, and that sort of a lack of regard for actions and their results, that disparaging of karma. If you think that, well, this presentation of emptiness is basically saying that nothing whatsoever is established, that there's just nothingness, then this really brings ruin in terms of how one has a disregard for karma. And so too, one might think, well, if there are no sentient beings, then for whom is it that I am developing love and compassion? One then gives up on those kinds of practices of engaging in love and compassion for the sake of other sentient beings, thinking that they are just utterly non-existent. And so this kind of ruin basically comes from, and here into the next verse then, and from misunderstanding this dharma, fools who presume themselves pundits, ruined by their denial of it, plummet straight down to the Avicii hell. So it is on this basis of a nihilistic kind of a view that someone will fall into the lower realms, disparaging the side of method, disregarding the kind of importance of actions, karma, cause and effect.
뭐야, 진짜서. 방어도 되다. 동반이 야보체 소나 되네 팬이만 보여라. 너무 감각에 싸워도 고매버도 그거라. 대 매번 동반이 때 매번 송반에 체달을 놓네. 예송을게 교만 무사네. 풍도 그거라. 됐네. 송 레바다 예배 왕게 야가다 또 풍바다 레바 가래 연구버데 셰게도와 디 엄마데 솔루가 니스적지도 정리되게 제대로 니반에 쓰여요. 디 가래 셰도서는 지들 세사 지들 카세 산 예배 칼라라고 사기네 고 칼라데 르 초에던도 사기와라. 다이나 칼라데 고 야부 마종다 망아 세바다 사에 좀 야부 매우 진짜 사이나 지들 카세 산 예배세 풍바단에 도바죠. 아니 소불 팽에서도 내보다 아니 그 시긴 줘야다. 근데 마부죠 마부요구라. 디디 견디 연구도 와서 칼라사다 마셔니나요. 지들 카세 산 예배 풍바단에 도바죠. 타르 풍바를 전에 심마르까네 시고 와서 어떤데 연구를 해서 와라. 살에서 가서 사단에 아무 종에나 근데 체력으로 나자 매버시 소부 또또야 폐네 소부 때보다 용했는데 이거도 와서 오라. 같이 사단 야부 중하다. 많이 많이 취시 마세버 되게 견대 연대티 연구도 와서 오라. 어디나 신에서 오라. 아니 가령 거라서나 대신 로버를 송한테 동반이게 되는데 라오에 당연히 똥바래 나세 라오요 말에 대진 레버리 좀 치지 요래서 아버지 삼당 통나 되게 간제 쇼초르치 나 삼로 삼로데 간제 쇼초르치 나예세 삼로 쇼초르치 네 신자데 쇼초르치 신자 매나 아니 콘도사야다 틸레바게다 콘도 요도데 차당이데 매나 차당 왕게 레게 봐 에러와 샬라 차와셔야 된다고 셔야지 좀 가두라 tiende ko yabu chagdo susu sendele susu kiba shen rokwa simjala chawa meba kuzule pedo kyo tendo yaga yongdo asigura kita lokbar songa de pungba dane tobajo ta tongba ni to lokbar songa ina ne kanga pungdu yo da cheda londo le jundo lumbachi ka ke chigmara sendi kari chone kersa chone tiba sana kari ne kyo mege chadura tishe lokbar songa de pungba dane tobajo 레버 쉐베 대화다 장줄라는 동반이게 전대야 오시시에서나 아니 챈들 대화란다 대화 샬레 차단 요르도라 차단 요르시 잠바다 자와도 야 펜도 거래 동반이 야보지 또 손은 동반이 마도게 심제도 저르베 다 콘도 텐데 삼루타 디오 삼라오에 다지 차단 삼루원데 손에 대대 토졸이 잠바 자와도 야 펜도 거라 레버 쉐베 대화다 장줄라는 베바도 tarwa top ture saje ko top ture nyomo se dure nyomo se sone tiwa gle ngeba se dure ane le chawa sangbu sheje ro tichene tarwa tamje kemba tobe julen do asgora o ti de ko ti samon gombolo du gusungora tang gombolo du oma ba na ne yone mena ti che sonsidra ti sonde de me soede sawane meba memba tenje de bone jo chile yeba 그 매번 송나니 네 소리께다 풍부터 그래서 세버전에 송구도 어떻게 시키냐
So then next, beginning with verse 121 and 122, then we have an explanation through an example of the benefits and defects of holding this properly or wrongly. So here it says then, again, if there are these great ruins that can come from a misunderstanding of this profound dharma of emptiness, there's also a great benefit, again, in that this gets rid of the root of all of our afflictions. So the benefits of a proper understanding are great as well. So here in 121 it says, through eating poor food, one will come to ruin. But by eating the right food, one attains vigor, health, strength, and pleasure. So here, if we eat in such a way that is correct for our body, I mean, really, we should be eating with the kind of motivation to sustain our body, to keep it healthy, to use for the Dharma. But if we eat in a way that is wrong, if we do so in a way that kind of disregards the composition of our body or what we should be eating, then it's going to bring us ruin. Whereas if we eat food properly, if we use this in the right way, then we will be benefiting from that. We will gain benefit from that proper kind of sustenance. So too, when it comes to our understanding of emptiness, likewise, this is 122, likewise, through poor understanding, one will come to ruin, but through right understanding, one attains happiness and unexcelled awakening. So here, if one is able to recognize that no, there is no self in the sense of no autonomous, independent, objectively existent self, but rather there is a self that is merely dependently arisen. This reduces our clinging, reduces the kind of misunderstanding and misapprehension that we have, that then in turn reduces our various afflictions, stops our harm for others, helps us to help others. And so this is what will then bring us happiness, both here and in the future. If we understand well, we will have greater compassion for other sentient beings. We will have a greater desire. We will understand that although there is no autonomously existent self, karma, cause, and effect still functions, and we still have the kind of regard for others. Yeah, sorry about the video for Geshe-tapkela. If we understand well, again, we will have a greater kind of love and compassion for others. We will be able to remove our afflictions, and we can go, all of the kind of positive actions that we engage in will go toward the cause of liberation and omniscience. So here, Venerable Nagarjuna is clearly stating that to hold emptiness as nothingness is going to bring great ruin, but emptiness, when properly understood, is the realization that can really bestow us all good happiness in this life, as well as unexcelled awakening.
So we'll just wait until Geshe can reconnect. They're fixing their problem. It'll just be just a few more minutes.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
거기도 왜?
Yeah, 거기도 this.
거기도
Yeah.
뭐 쉬거든 왜 쉬거든 하고.
아까 쓴 거를 되게 못했네.
Yeah, 무드네 shena digires.
야, 저기 쉬어도 쉬어서
Shesason.
뭐야 하는데. 당연히 내려다 가서래. 너 쇼로가 니스tak숨들아.
Lare.
그거를 시그러서나. 아야, 니스tak숨들아. 나다다. 사무토 그 바던데 봐. 뭐다 동반이 떠야 돼. 또 가와래 되지. 삼루탄도 접소제 바던데 봐체네. 아니 냥고래. 야부제 접소제네 동반이 삼루탄고래 스티셰도. 그거를 시그러서나. Teacher dilla ponata, maybe tawa panede. Got Tungun Drupcher Yandabe, Shella Dede, Chozuki Sudwa. Oh, that Italia Shebanashi, Tombani Sudu, Logbar Son, the Tombani, maybe turn to Soina, and it can chamber your days or Nimichi Sera. And it tangent Reverend Meva Maiba Round to Rangun to a major. Tenzin Reverend Joe Sula, Yeva Shebaina, and you go to Banjo Tondate, Chadala Sobanyamo Shibet on the Chine, Pendo Young Gressigora. Bigioda. President. Upon a maybe she should have got. Oh, Yanda Beton Sheba like this one. Teacher Dilla Poma say, Tombani Delia. Rangwini Truba Jimba Rawati Truba Lasaba Fuache. United maybe to Maiba. Maybe Tawa Panenese. Tombani to the maybe to that is some Cheber Tawa de Panenese. Tungi Drubjeri Andagbe, Shelan and de Chon to Chase. Oh, Tini, Tombani to Yandagba Shebayena. And it to Rawati Truba Tombayena, Tangent Reverend Juma Samdo, Chachi Roma, Penny Roma, Kitty Roma. Tension Reverend Joam, Tenor Tapa some of Chachi Roma, Joshena, and the Cassation Boy Gracia. Tungu Drupcheriandabe, and Shella Nede, chose use all this subsocia, Tombani Samlutandiza, Yabocha Jahakoache, Tombani to that maybe to Maiba, round to be Mebata, round to be Mania, Tension Reverend Joam, Chachetam Roma. Let you the wrong less about the day, said the subsociety, Tombani to that, some of the Tatala Malua, Chedala Milua, or the dish called this one. Yeah, what is
So here, then picking up with verse 123, this is advising us that we should have caution regarding realizing this meaning of the profound. This is something that is difficult to understand, emptiness, and therefore we should listen with a kind of caution, conscientiousness. As was explained before, there is a great fault that comes from holding this wrongly, from holding emptiness to mean utter non-existence. So if when hearing these teachings upon there not being some kind of an autonomous, independently established self, if someone holds that wrongly as meaning utter non-existence, then that causes them to fall into a kind of nihilism that deprecates all of these views like karma, cause, and effect, and having love for sentient beings and so forth. So as it says here, therefore, do not deny this dharma and abandon nihilistic views. Don't deny the kind of karma of, the view of selflessness, but instead understand properly. This will abandon nihilistic views. In order to obtain all aims, strive for perfect understanding. So here it is the case that if one is able to hold this properly, not falling into a kind of nihilistic extreme, but instead understanding emptiness as meaning the lack of some kind of autonomous, independent sort of a self, then one can come to understand and realize that all cause and effect, all karma, all sort of benefit and harm, good and bad, and so forth, is suitable, is functional within emptiness. So here one needs to be cautious in terms of not holding to a kind of nihilistic view, nor holding to a view of sort of permanence, but rather understood properly, this is the view that will get you out of samsara completely. Yeah.
오야 더는 아주 데리다 가서라. 뭔데 주셔도야. 뭔데 주셔가 되려 안에 그 갑고 버서 쳐봐. 뭐지 되는 셔. 더 돈이 마도베 코알에 돈이 마도베 코아다. 티 마도나 에네 뭐도 어리다다. 돈이 마도나 코아 코르그레스 테 손자 돈이 또 그레스 코알에 들어와리야. 돈바니 마도베 바르토 에네 테 마도바 테세도 뭐도 라다 메이코바 토베치도 베고레스도 디나네다 돈바니 마도나 에네 코알에 코르지 테그레스 티시도 디레 니슈잡시 디레도 니슈잡시 디레 나도 근데서도스나 춘데 용서 마시나스 동반에게 춘데 용서 줘봐 내로 지다리 바테나 시치타와시도 마시나 내가 진반에 제수 조스 동반에 마시나 내가 삼상아 라와 투바지베지 바테 그래 나 삼상아 라와 지여베네 내가 아이세 아니 아이르 아이 지지 신자 셔부지 때 그래 뒤에는 내가 저 신초스 딱초던 신초스 어디에는 차다 소소그 롱자자 소다 때로를 잘라서 봐 대졸은 내가 제게리야 아니 봐 콘도사야라 소봐 다던다 동반이 마도나 나오냐 베라와 주바지 베지 봐요 그래 대바에는 아니 나 라와 집어지 여번 집에는 나의 나의 루사 나의 년데세 나의 롱버세 나의 주주세 내가 저도 십수처로 봐 나가 저 뒤에 줄로에나다 미래에나다 롱바에나다네 나줄롱바 거줄롱바 나줄 줄로다 쳐이나 베나 차단시에 있던다를 추성부치도 추성거데 이나 대 차단패가 줄로도요라 나라도 저거라 저거랑 차단패와데 이 말에 되는 나라도 삼을다다고 근데고 다이나네 현도시에서 다신살은 진다다 디다다네 요들은 예바탐제 저거 교루세야 되라 다세 라와 싶으시반제나 근데 셴세도 셴다시 개춘중세 나 세도 라와 개춘부세 근데 나의 초데 그제 나의 초데네 상마되기라 제 현자시서르시 아니 파조들이야 메틴베쇼 현조시세 이 차단 심장에 고르르 이치 차단기에 시루시세 네 차단 삼대와게래 용화에 숨길래 미게 왔다 근데 마부사에 못 죽어라 다연안에 현도시 다셔철은 진다다 디다다네 용들은 예바탐제 중원 주세 어디 교대 그랬구나 춘데 로버를 춘데 용수 마시나 지다와신도 동반이 되어 오지 마시나 난지반에 제수 내가 삼가라와 두 번째 그래 나라와 지여베나 내가 이스 내가 초세 내 초만 못해 착단계 시대 그래 되네 착단계 왕게 내 레사네 과거지 대된 거라 텔레 계단 미게 레스 나 삼장한지 숙천부여나 아니 나의 삼루티 왕게 교회를 해줘서 왔으나야 코앞에서 줄어도 그래 교회를 해줘서는 계속 같이 줄어도라 지다고 가서 오라 내 개와지 사기 연애야 나랑 좀 안쟁게 왕게 교회를 해서 와서 코에 줄어도 거라 안쟁 바 원도 마당게 시기 레지사웨나 그 타르베 줄어도 거라 레사에 집어이나야 저기 코앞에 저기 줄어도 가르쳐 나오냐베 착당하게 꾸내라네 개회 다 나외 꾸내라네 때 미게 엄마도 개월에도 하기로 착배왕기 개월에 쌓여 열와 라라 착배왕기 랑기 년대들 소바 착배왕기 텐데 출루지기 마음이 어쩌라 개왕기 개월에 쌓았으나 개월에 대고 코에 줄는도 거라 땅 나오냐 방안지기 꾸네 말라네 침바동 아르비 찍레지 사기나 그 타르베 줄는도 거라 마동 가서 가서 코에 줄는도 요 말와 어디서 거라 게다 가서 최대 용수 마시나 난지반에 제수죠 동반이 최대 마시나 나 삼사단다 가서 정말로 여기에 난지 라와 집에 시바 자기 가서 정말 요라 나가 쇼쇼 문제게 와라 어디 제수죠 그래서 나오냐 베라와 제수죠 바이나 아니 나이세다 아니 콘조세 차다 다연나 다세 개천부지나 아니 개천주 현다지 받지라 다연나는 현도시 다신 챌린지다 기다다는 요래는 결상만 그래서라 텔레 계단 미겔레 텔레 개와 상당해서 어떻든다 가르치고서는 동반이 마시베 받을이야 아니 가래 아주 내 가르사네 코에 주다 된들이야 주고라 최대 요소 마시나 나중에 제수 요구래 나중에 그네는 내 사바이나 텔레네 개와다 미겔레 가르사바이나 또 개와레 사바이나 모두 라미타 대외 줄을 미겔레 사는 게 손다 동행 중에 줄을 내서 오래 야 되지lamna
So here, then turning to the next verse, and just as a side note to what Geshe-la is saying, sometimes we are following the commentary of Gyaltsab, although because it is not available in English, she's trying not to read all of it, but in terms of the kinds of outline that we are following. So we now turn to the cause and result of higher rebirths, and there's sort of like the sort of what is laid out for this occasion and then the actual meaning and so forth. So here, beginning with how if we don't realize emptiness, we will continue to cycle in samsara. And this comes then in verse 124. So here, basically, until we get to the point where we have understood emptiness, all of our actions are going to lead to renewed birth within samsara. And so here, as it says, when this dharma is not understood, eye grasping continues. Due to that, one engages in constructive and destructive karma, and from that comes fortunate and unfortunate rebirths. So here, as long as we have no knowledge or we have not realized emptiness, then we are going to have this thought of I. And as long as we have that kind of grasping at an I, and then grasping at mine and my side, this will lead to us engaging in kind of various actions that perpetuate our rebirth within samsara. So first thinking I, we have a sense of this I as something that is autonomous, independent, existent in and of itself. And then there are those things that we consider to be on our side, the kind of mine. And then there is that which is other, which we see as harmful to us or those that we love or to the possessions that we have. And so really, there is a verse which basically explains that holding to an I and then a mine, we have this strong kind of distinction between self and other, attachment to our own side and aversion to the other. And this really is what then perpetuates the cycle of all of the various faults. We give rise to actions that are virtuous or non-virtuous and continue to circle in samsara. And so again, this kind of like a feeling of we hold to this I as being like autonomously, independently existent, and everything that is like out there that is other, we hold as being other. We put into these two different kinds of camps, and based upon our grasping and thinking that there is such a like really truly autonomously existent I, we engage in various actions thinking that they are for our profit, that they are for our benefit. But really, this is the source of all of our various faults. When we have a strong sense of that autonomously existent I and a kind of clinging to it, a kind of cherishing of that, we then we can do virtuous actions, but virtue that is done motivated by grasping at a self is going to still lead to further rebirth within samsara. But that which is motivated by our attachment to gaining a good rebirth, for example, will lead to a good rebirth within samsara. Whereas those kinds of actions that are motivated by our I grasping that are harmful to others, we are then going to experience birth in the lower realms. So here, until we are able to come to a full realization of emptiness, it's important that we do engage in virtue in order to gain good rebirth within samsara. But really, it's out of not knowing emptiness. We all have this kind of innate grasping at an I, and then a sense of mine, and then a sense of others. And from that, then, out of not knowing emptiness, not knowing that there is no such autonomously, independently existent self as it appears to us, we follow after that grasping, and thereby, as it says here, engage in constructive and destructive karma. And from that comes our fortunate and unfortunate rebirths.
그래서
Dison.
뭐야. 나한테 맞으면서 오늘 태양가 되지 줄라 라봐. 그러면서 다 당분이 있어도더라. 태양가 되지 줄라 라봐서도 어디 가서도서나 내남고도 최동신 바르도 천대 타마리야. 미거를 천대 두배 자다니 디다 셴도 내미주스 어디를 떠들 어디 가서 그러시나
Gen di drosan, dechi GC ngazimpa, sawe chuni di mashena.
근데 사송에
Di drosasun.
맞어 로사서래
Dromason.
들어와 리송에 티치리 들베 티치 시번 짐바 스타마데서 그래 니슈장아 돼야 어디서나 니슈장아 들어와
나를.
야 어디 니슈장아 돼 가르서나 제 subject 마서 들어와 때 마도 봐도 동반에 마도 봐도 뭔도 사다 메고 마토베 줄서 배고를 스티셔도 전에 내가 야 전에 가라 티치리 지시 알지 봐 내가 세르 쉐디 마셔보다들 지시도 나를 좀 배가오냐 배도 나 삼성으로 점을 시키면다 나 라와셔고도 와 나라도 나 삼대자 라와지 삼대요라 지단 산제데 다점부터 저기 대신 대처랑 레벨에서 어디든 직대나 대다 traso세 타녀의 왕게레세 무슨 가도 나시게 나 삼자 라와도 두번 좀 삼을때 우리면서 말아 이나 타녀 tra다도 나다 교세로 어디 대처랑 저거를 봐서 어디 직대나 대다 traso세 타녀의 왕게 샤고 삼을때 거기도 와 나서도 자테를 나라도 나서도 라운에 지기리 예배 삼을 거기도 와 세상 나서 지구에 대해서 랑원에 들어와서 오늘 센티스 오서라 대체 시바 아니 뭐지 대체 지생 알지 봐 세외 최대 마시나 나오냠도 랑와 주반진 배가 안간제 세외 최 동반이네 마시바 대세도 오서라 동반이 로려고 추토고 말 대세도 이제 동반이 고상로 마다네 알아봤고 최단로에 내가 요라 거 맞으나 샤샤시거라 그 가지 우리는 뜻이 진다 추듬다 세배처럼 그버도 원도 람미 고반 톱제게 아주 딸이 아무도 소 진다 추듬 세세와 세대 담주 람부체세 담배체게 람가 전부 당아도 원도 람미 고반 톱제게 주체버리세 어제를 놓고래 송거라 동반이 있어도 기부 정례 타르바 토베로 마지 봐도 기부 정을 시단에 동반이 공고에게 요마라 기부 총인데도 좋아심만 하다미 고반 좀 톱고요나 대체도 주들이야 동반이 고에게 요마라 대도 초진의 동반이지. 그때 매날 공간지 쇼체스요네. 그 견다 요르와 간지 쇼체도 견가가 연구라. 참잘 팬도 연구하려 되게. 아, 참잘 삼루도 쇼체부여나 딱잖아. 야구 마찬에 야구 용 말다 겨워치만 해서 그래. 아니 라담이 겨워 도도 마신 어떤가 용서 말해서 삼루 쇼체부 코네야 섭소지. 섭소지 요래 도도아. 근데 어다 근데 가담에 그 시도 송야라 가셨는데 아니 야 맞는데 직접을 따와도 상계기 동의해서 참저 직접은 직접 리슈 전부 연는 거 제고도 삼사야 팽기와래 날 중에 말에 삼사가 삼사 삼루슈 전부 되게 않고 난지 슈 전부 되게 나 동네 연내 기존에 되게 명아 야부터 거기 삼사 삼루슈 쳐와야 지단한테 팬데 팬배 차이 연구하라 그 지단도 그 녀본 삼직 싸워야 그렇게 말이돼 저인데 되는 거 알아서다 기술이 기술이 지시 알지 봐 세외 천대 마시나 동반인간지 라오에 멜로디 아니 라오에 따데파 매버스네 땡진 레버리 좀 아sam리아 자제 탐제데 롱아 샤투기 매바 샤투기 매바셔라 진짜 바르텔라스 거라 세외 천대 마시바 기시 진당 주름다 세배철라 그버저세 어다데 모두라미 고반토에 규프숨 소바데 데바 진짜 주름 세세와 담줄 람보첼라카 마그세 티 망바체네 베트무 많이 버친 세세도 진바들 가리는 거에서는 송과 샤고라 진짜 주름 될래야 같이 진짜 서바들래 송과 용거하라 가시 민지 그 집바들 상승이 집바 최지 집바 민지 왜 집바서 다침도 진짜 주름세 다 주름된 예주도 몇 주름 내게 주고 주려서라 서바들이야 내절에 지면야 배서봐 동네 땅에 계서봐 초랑에 섬겨서봐서 다침부려도 자티 남아있는 거 가리나 샤를 차와대 계속 요마라 가르모 가리나 샤를 차와 재미서로 샤나 이나 때도 등에나 만주 제대만 보인 것도 처벌 필요해 돼요 버저디 야 처벌 필요해 된다 만주 제대 따위 추진세로 추기 추진세로 어디 단다까지 등산에 요라 다 로카시에 친수와 로 개고 치매도 뒤도 중요로 친수마도 심마해다 된데 왜 마부 마세다 뒤지도 마세다 요하다 버저피게 농방 가셔진데 요하다 그때나 단다에 고라로 다직사야 된데 저 앞에 기코나 되나 정도 추기 추진세 따위 추진세로 근데 제가 되게 요구도 와. 단 넘버 뛰어 말아. 심지어도 이내 가게 내지. 장원에 차와 bom바데 봉게 말해서 차와 쳐수 지나네. 가실 차와 지는 뒤부터 거라. 근데 리그 말로 저때 라바 찬 조마 지제스네. 차와라. 그래서 밤 먹어 한 두요라. 랑도 제다. 원내지네. 차와 원내 bom바데 리그 맞춰서 술에 차와 쳐 조마를 세대. 여튼 많이 버텨야 되도. 현在开始저와 전에 리버스로 셔요라 어떤데 말해서라 자다 동반이 마도 봐도 대성대 배 개첨부래서 대성대 배 개첨부 제도에 내좀되다 현在잠바다 저와다 저 시시로 친 저와 shum을 친 판바도 시시로라 어쩌니 콜레 좀 되긴 어디 야보지시네 야 동반이 삼루다나 아니 아 제단 물로하다 되게 해봐도라 대치 시나야 됐어
So, here, until we are able to realize this profound dharma of emptiness, then we need to make an effort at gaining good rebirths within samsara, so this then comes in verse 125, where it says, "Therefore, as long as you have not understood this Dharma that destroys the eye-grasping, devote yourself to the Dharma of generosity, ethical conduct, and fortitude." So here, when we think about this eye-grasping, it's not just the sort of mere thought of I, but rather for us as ordinary beings, when we think I, it's mixed together with this sense of an I that is autonomously, inherently existent from its own side. So we see like Buddhas and other highly realized beings speak about, oh, when I was this or I was that. They use that term, but they understand that I to be something that is merely dependently designated, a dependent origination. Whereas when we grasp at an I and we use the convention of I, we are really, it is mixed together with this sense of it being something that is autonomously existent. And so here, this is something where when it comes to understanding emptiness, if one doesn't, it's better not to introduce emptiness to someone who it's going to lead them to a kind of nihilistic view. So as it says here, as long as you've not understood that kind of dharma that destroys the eye grasping, devote yourself to the dharma of generosity, ethical conduct, and fortitude, which we call sort of the great path. And really, until we get to the kind of trainings for the being of middling scope, where we're genuinely wanting to get out of samsara, then really there is no need to talk about emptiness. To be able to have an understanding of karma, cause and effect, like what actions are going to bring suffering and what are going to bring good, this is something that is most important. So here, there is a sort of a fault. Most of the time we would say that our eye grasping is the source of all of our various afflictions. It is the source of all of our faults. But to hold to a sense of self in the sense that, oh, well, if I do something bad, this is going to bring bad results for me. If I do something good, this is going to bring good results for me. So I need to be careful. That kind of grasping at an I or having an apprehension of an I is positive in some ways. So the Kadampa masters, really referencing this, refer to the sort of this view of the perishable as actually being the continuity of the Buddha, as in there is a temporary benefit that comes from holding to a sense of I, a sense of self, and that we need to care about what happens to us, whether we will have suffering or happiness, even though we can recognize that ultimately this is the source of all of our various afflictions. Until we are able to come to the point of understanding emptiness, we really should be making an effort at particularly these three causes. We need to have all three: generosity, and generosity is a very vast practice. It's not just material generosity, but giving freedom from fear, protection from fear, giving advice, having the kind of generosity of the Dharma. And there's ethical conduct that involves the ethics of refraining from negative actions and the ethics of engaging in positive actions and working for the benefit of others. And then there's the practice of fortitude or patience, which involves being able to not retaliate when we are harmed, to be able to put up with various types of suffering, to be able to have fortitude in the face of learning the Dharma. And so here, really, the essence of this Buddha Dharma, particularly at the beginning, but throughout all of it, is that we don't do anything that causes harm to others, that really the basis of the entire practice is non-harm and working to benefit others. We can see that in other traditions, there isn't that same kind of a sense. Like some engage in, although it maybe has lessened more recently, engage in acts of mass slaughter as a kind of offering to their god, whether they're killing oxen or other types of beings. And again, although this has lessened some, there are many who think that through doing such an offering, and that they are creating good results, even though it is something that is fundamentally harmful. So we see in certain traditions that they hold on to actions that are harmful as being dharma. Like, for example, those that hold caste or where was your sort of station in life to be very important, and due to their religion, for example, they won't touch those who are untouchable. Those kinds of disrespect, that is a form of harm to others, but yet they are holding that as sort of intrinsic to their dharma, to what they think is their practice of religion. And so here, as is encapsulated in these three practices of generosity, ethics, and fortitude, the basis of all dharma is non-harm and is working to benefit others. And this is extremely important, that we have this foundation of a certainty in karma, cause and effect. And when we act in accordance with that, eventually we will come to the place where the dharma of this profound dharma of emptiness is understood. But in the meantime, it's important to have this kind of a basis that is not nothingness whatsoever, but actually appreciates the kinds of connections between actions and their results.
Oh yeah, that is also.
So
Yeah.
we're out of time for today. So thank you all.
Oh yeah.
Tutuche Geshe-la, Genla, thank you. You've given us a lot to think about this week. And thank you, Katrina, for your very clear translation. For anyone watching online, we'll come together again next Monday morning, 8 o'clock Pacific time. So we'll finish with some dedication prayers.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and the spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispelling the darkness of the beings in the three worlds always increase. Iram Guru Ramna Mandala Kamyatayami. Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awake state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore.
Oh yeah, tuche na genla, dunja
Oh
jema
yeah.
jeong.
Oh yeah, welcome. Welcome. Oh yeah.